Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 18th, 2024. Well, it looks as though Joe Biden has gone over the deep end. He's cementing his legacy as a killer, as a pawn of the deep state, with his announcement that he has now cleared the way for Ukraine to use U.S. long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. This has been an issue for months now. Zelensky's been begging for it. The NATO chiefs, the European Union leaders have all been insisting that Biden must free this. And of course, within his own administration, the key point person on this has been Secretary of State Blinken, working hand in hand with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. Now, Biden had been warned, according to David Ignatius, by the military, by the Pentagon, that this would be asserting NATO involvement in the war against Russia. Now, you don't need this approval to use these long-range weapons to do that, because everyone knows that NATO's been a major force in arming Ukraine and working out the strategy. But with these long-range missiles, the so-called ATACMS, the technicians from Ukraine are not capable of doing this on their own. They're going to need U.S. and NATO officials doing the targeting and working with them. And as the Russians have said, if it appears that the U.S. and NATO are directly involved in attacks on Russia, then they will assume that this is an indication of NATO essentially declaring war against Russia. Under those circumstances, the consequences, said Vladimir Putin, will be very harsh indeed for the Europeans and for the United States. Now, this appears to be something that Biden is shrugging and letting go by. Again, as I said, Biden is not the master of his own fate, but is acting on behalf of the war hawks of the military-industrial complex to defend the Unipolar Order. And if this is the way they're defending the Unipolar Order, then the sooner it crashes and disappears, the better. Also involved in this are people like Starmer, the war hawk Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Macron has given his blessing. Now, for Russia, the idea that this is now a NATO coordinated war against Russia will have consequences that we'll have to see over the next days how this unfolds. But it's clearly a sign of the desperation of the West that they're moving to do this. The war is lost. The Ukraine war is lost. So why in the last 2 months of Biden's presidency would they choose to go ahead and escalate? Well, as pointed out by Bob Woodward, what Blinken keeps saying to Biden is, it's your legacy. And the implicit idea is, do you want your legacy to be that you capitulated to Putin? And Biden is enough of a macho that he would say, no, I'm not going to allow that to occur. Now, the reality is that there's panic in the West over the war in Ukraine, over what's going to happen with Israel, over the situation in Taiwan, over the economy, panic over everything. And then on top of that now, panic over what it means that Donald Trump will be coming into the White House in just over 2 months. Now, the panic is also, as the Unipolar Order is crashing, we see in Germany, the German government crashed. But Chancellor Olaf Scholz chose to call Putin and have a discussion with him for the first time in 2 years. We also see the BRICS on the march, the combination of forces of the global South acting for their sovereign interests, moving toward a security arrangement in Eurasia, but the security is directly connected to economic development. Should the West oppose that? Of course not. But instead of participating, it's moving ahead with the desperate measures of sanctions and funding these wars. Now, we see the same panic in the response to the appointment by Donald Trump of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General and of Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. The Gaetz thing is obvious. I'll probably have more to say about that in the next couple of days. But he is a very, or has been, a very strong opponent of the weaponization of the Justice Department against Donald Trump, but also the use of the Justice Department to run operations such as Russiagate. Despite all that's been written to show the corruption in Russiagate, why is it that the Justice Department continues to allow the discussion to take place that Russia was involved in the election of Trump, and Russia continues to be a threat to meddle and interfere in U.S. elections? Gaetz, as Attorney General, might just ride roughshod over that, destroy it, knock out the permanent bureaucrats in the Justice Department who act not to defend national interests and to defend our freedoms, but to impose censorship and shut down those who don't go along with the consensus. Now, on Gabbard, this is most interesting because the head of the Director of National Intelligence oversees 18 intelligence agencies. It's a product of the post-9/11 period when it was concluded that 9/11 was undetected because the intelligence community did not have a clear direct channel to the White House. Now, what this means is that Gabbard will be overseeing the work of all the intelligence agencies, including CIA, FBI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and so on. Why is that important? And why are they opposed to her? Because she knows what they've been up to. She actually was in Syria. She met with Assad, and she's being attacked for that. They say, how can we trust her because she gives credibility to dictators? Well, let's flip it around. Maybe we should trust her because she's willing to talk to people that don't agree with us. She's willing to find out. What the hell is intelligence anyway? Clipping newspapers or actually intervening to find out what's going on from the inside? I think Gabbard is highly qualified for that. Her anti-war record in terms of Ukraine, in terms of Syria, is quite strong. What was she looking at in Syria? The lies about who's using chemical weapons. And where do those lies come from? British intelligence, the White Helmets, the Foreign Office of the British, the CIA. And so we have an opportunity now, if Gabbard is in, to rip the cover off these operations and find out who is actually involved in them and why. Now, I think she's mistaken in her support for Israel and the Gaza situation, but that's something that we'll have to work out over time. And if she's open to look at the evidence, I'm sure at a certain point she'll recognize that Netanyahu is a war criminal who should be removed from office. But the most important thing is that she can expose Russiagate, she can expose what was done to try and stop Trump, she can expose the lies about Putin and Russia. And this actually is essential if we're going to have a competent, functioning intelligence agency. She also knows Russiagate. Remember, she was in the Democratic National Committee when the Clinton campaign decided to use the DNC to target Trump as a Russian agent. So this becomes very, very interesting. Now, as a result, it's necessary for us to defend her appointment because there are people in the Democratic Party who are aggressively trying to discredit her, such as Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is operating on behalf of the FBI and controlling the Democratic Party in 2016 to make sure that Bernie Sanders didn't get the nomination, that Hillary got it. So hopefully a lot of this will come out at the hearings. Even more will come out if Gabbard is able to walk into the offices and start doing her job. So we need to mobilize support for the Gabbard nomination. And we need to make sure that the evidence of corruption points to the real corrupt individuals, the Democratic National Committee, for example, certainly not the Russians. So this is a moment where the average person can play a role in shaping history. And that's something that we must do if we're going to bring our country back from the brink of going over the cliff on defense of a unipolar order that should never have existed in the first place. So take a look at the link to the meeting of the International Peace Coalition from last Friday. Very interesting exchanges with Colonel Richard Black, who also went to Syria, who is a defender of Tulsi Gabbard. And Black was a Republican conservative state senator in Virginia, and is now working with the International Peace Coalition. So look at the discussion from Friday from the Zoom call, and let's make sure that we don't allow the panic of the oligarchy to disarm the capability of the United States to sniff out the real enemies and defeat them.